The pregnancy test fell from my trembling fingers and clattered onto the marble bathroom floor of our penthouse apartment. 2 pink lines, clear as day. After 3 years of Marcus telling everyone who would listen that I was the reason we couldn't have children, that my body was broken, that I was defective, I was staring at proof that he had been lying all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and at 32, I had just discovered that my husband of 5 years had been systematically destroying my reputation, my relationships, and my sense of self-worth with a lie so cruel that it had isolated me from everyone I loved. But Marcus didn't know that I had been quietly building something he could never take away from me, something that would make his betrayal the biggest mistake of his life. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in our pristine Upper East Side apartment. Marcus had left early for his job at the investment firm, kissing my forehead with the same perfunctory affection he'd shown for months. I had been feeling unusually nauseous for the past week, dismissing it as stress from the new restaurant I was quietly planning to open. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very symptoms I had been experiencing were the ones Marcus claimed would never happen to me. I picked up the test with shaking hands, reading the instructions again even though I had memorized them. Pregnant. 2 to 3 weeks. The timing made my stomach clench with a mixture of joy and absolute fury. 3 weeks ago had been Marcus's birthday dinner, where his mother had made another one of her pointed comments about how sad it was that I couldn't give her son the children he deserved. Where his sister Jennifer had rubbed her growing belly and suggested that maybe Marcus should consider finding someone who could actually fulfill his dreams of fatherhood. I had sat there in silence, as I always did, letting the shame wash over me because I believed, like everyone else at that table, that the problem was mine. Marcus had been so convincing, so detailed in his explanations about my supposed medical issues, that even I had begun to doubt my own body despite never receiving a definitive diagnosis from any doctor. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized anymore. Once confident and vibrant, I had become a shadow of myself over the past 3 years. My long black hair had lost its shine, my skin looked perpetually tired, and my eyes held a sadness that seemed permanently etched into my features. The successful marketing executive who had once commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals had been gradually replaced by someone who apologized for existing. But Marcus didn't know about the restaurant. He didn't know about the business plan I had been perfecting for 18 months, or the investors who had already committed funding, or the lease I had signed under my maiden name in the trendy Soho district. He especially didn't know about the inheritance from my grandmother that I had kept separate from our joint accounts, the one that had provided the seed money for my venture. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner with the family tonight. Don't embarrass me with your moping. Jennifer is announcing something special." I stared at the message, feeling something shift inside me. Jennifer was announcing something special. Probably another pregnancy, another opportunity for the family to discuss how inadequate I was, how I was failing my husband, how Marcus deserved so much better than a barren wife who couldn't give him the legacy he wanted. But not tonight. Tonight would be different. I called my doctor's office and somehow managed to get an appointment for that afternoon. Dr. Rebecca Williams had been my gynecologist for years, and she had never once told me I was infertile. In fact, she had repeatedly assured me that my reproductive system appeared completely normal during our consultations. It was Marcus who had convinced me that Dr. Williams was being overly optimistic, that the specialists he claimed to have, consulted with privately, had given him the real truth about my condition. Specialists I had never met. Doctors whose names he could never quite remember when I asked for details. Medical reports that he said were too technical and upsetting for me to see. The pieces of his deception were beginning to crystallize in my mind like a photograph developing in slow motion. How had I been so naive? How had I allowed myself to believe that my own husband would lie about something so fundamental, so devastating? The answer came to me as I dressed for my doctor's appointment. Because I loved him. Because I trusted him completely. Because when someone you love tells you something with conviction and supposed supporting evidence, you want to believe them, even when that something destroys your sense of self-worth. Dr. Williams confirmed what the pregnancy test had already told me. Not only was I pregnant, but I was perfectly healthy and had never shown any signs of infertility. When I hesitantly mentioned Marcus's claims about specialists and test results, her expression grew concerned. "Sarah, I've never referred you to any fertility specialists because you've never needed to see one. Your cycles are regular, your hormone levels are normal, and every examination has shown a completely healthy reproductive system. If Marcus has been telling you otherwise, then someone has been giving him false information. Or he had been creating false information." I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes after the appointment, letting the full scope of Marcus's betrayal sink in. This wasn't just about lying to his family or making me feel inadequate. This was about controlling the narrative of our relationship, positioning himself as the long-suffering husband married to a defective wife. It was about manipulation so calculated and cruel that it had reshaped how everyone in our social circle viewed me. But it was also about something else. Something that made my blood run cold as I thought about the conversations I had overheard, the phone calls Marcus thought I couldn't hear, the way he had been increasingly distant and critical. Over the past 6 months, Marcus was planning to leave me. He had been building a case for why our marriage was doomed, why he deserved sympathy and support when he eventually filed for divorce. The infertility story wasn't just about making me feel bad about myself. It was about positioning himself as the victim when he abandoned his broken wife for someone who could give him what he supposedly needed. My hands gripped the steering wheel as the full picture became clear. The late nights at work that had increased dramatically. The business, trips that seemed to have no real business purpose. The way he had been subtly encouraging me to become more involved in my own projects, as if creating distance between us. He wasn't just lying about my fertility. He was preparing to leave me and wanted to ensure that when he did, everyone would understand and support his decision. But Marcus had made a critical error. He had underestimated me so completely that he had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. The restaurant project wasn't just a passion venture. It was a comprehensive business enterprise that would make me financially independent from him for the first time since our marriage. The contracts I had signed, the partnerships I had formed, the staff I had already begun recruiting, all of it had been done quietly and methodically while Marcus believed I was wallowing in self-pity about my supposed inability to conceive. I had spent 18 months building something that would give me not just financial freedom, but professional credibility and personal fulfillment. Something that existed entirely separate from Marcus and his opinions about my worth. The irony was breathtaking. While he had been systematically destroying my confidence and reputation with his lies about infertility, I had been creating the foundation for a life that wouldn't need him at all. While he thought he was preparing to leave a broken, dependent woman, he was actually about to face someone who had been preparing for independence all along. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of his deception. If Marcus had been lying about this, what else had he been lying about? What other aspects of our relationship had been built on false foundations? I drove home slowly, my mind racing through possibilities and plans. The family dinner tonight would be interesting. Jennifer's special announcement, whatever it was, would provide the perfect opportunity to observe the dynamics I had been too emotionally devastated to notice before. Now that I knew the truth about my own fertility, I could watch Marcus's performance with clear eyes. The apartment felt different when I returned. The pristine white walls and minimalist furniture that I had once found sophisticated now seemed cold and sterile. This had never really been our home, I realized. It had been Marcus's showcase, designed to impress visitors and reinforce his image as a successful Manhattan professional. I had simply been another carefully curated element in his perfect life, until I had supposedly failed to fulfill my designated role. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen island, staring at the pregnancy test I had brought home with me, a baby. After years of believing I was incapable of conceiving, I was carrying Marcus's child, the child he claimed to want so desperately that my inability to provide one had become the defining tragedy of his life. The question now was what to do with this information. Telling Marcus immediately felt wrong, though I couldn't quite articulate why. Something in my instincts was warning me to be careful, to think through the implications before revealing this. Development. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Elena Rodriguez, my best friend from college and the only person who had consistently questioned Marcus's narrative about my supposed infertility. "How are you feeling today?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the gentle concern that had become standard in our conversations over the past year. "Better than I have in a long time," I answered honestly. "Really? That's wonderful. What's changed?" I hesitated, then decided to confide in her. Elena had been the one person who had never quite bought Marcus's story, who had gently suggested that maybe I should get a second opinion, who had noticed things about my husband that I had been too close to see clearly. "Elena, I need to tell you something, but I need you to promise to keep this between us for now." "Of course. What's going on?" "I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Elena spoke. "Sarah, that's incredible news. But I thought Marcus said that you couldn't." "Marcus has been lying about everything. I saw Dr. Williams today, and she confirmed that I've never had any fertility issues. None. Marcus made it all up." The sharp intake of breath from Elena was audible. "That bastard. Sarah, do you realize what this means? He's been psychologically abusing you for years with a lie that served his own purposes." Hearing someone else say it out loud made the reality even more stark. Psychological abuse. That's exactly what it had been. A systematic campaign designed to make me believe I was fundamentally flawed, that I was lucky to have a husband who would stay with me despite my supposed defects. "Elena, there's more. I think he's planning to leave me. I think the whole infertility story was his way of preparing everyone for when he files for divorce, making sure he looks like the victim instead of the one who abandoned his wife." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not going to be the naive, trusting woman I've been for the past 5 years. If Marcus wants to play games with people's lives and emotions, he's about to discover that he's not the only one who can be strategic." After Elena and I hung up, I spent the afternoon researching. Not baby websites or pregnancy information, but legal websites, divorce procedures, asset division, grounds for separation. What I discovered was both illuminating and infuriating. In New York, one of the grounds for divorce was cruel and inhuman treatment. Deliberately lying to your spouse about their medical condition in order to cause psychological harm would certainly qualify. If I could prove that Marcus had been systematically deceiving me about my fertility, it wouldn't just be grounds for divorce, it would be grounds for a very favorable divorce settlement. But proof was the key. I needed evidence that Marcus had been lying, not just my word against his. I began thinking about the conversations I had heard, the phone calls, the comments he had made to family members. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Had I been too emotionally overwhelmed to notice details that might help me now? Were there text messages, emails, or documents that might reveal the truth about his deception? The laptop Marcus used for personal matters was sitting on his desk, in our home office. I had never felt the need to invade his privacy before, but the discovery of his lies had fundamentally changed the rules of our relationship. If he could systematically deceive me about something as important as my own medical condition, then my respect for his privacy had been forfeited. His laptop was password protected, but I knew Marcus well enough to guess correctly on the second try. His password was Legacy 2019, the year he had started talking about wanting children and building a family legacy. The irony was almost laughable. What I found in his email archives made my hands shake with rage. Months of correspondence with someone named Jessica, a marketing coordinator at his investment firm who was 26 years old and had been very clear about wanting children soon. Their email exchanges had started professionally, but had gradually become increasingly personal and intimate. But it was an email from 3 months ago that made me actually gasp out loud. Jessica, the family dinner last night went perfectly. My wife looked so pathetic when Mother brought up children again. I think I've finally convinced everyone that she's the problem, not me. Dr. Henley confirmed that there's nothing wrong with my fertility, which we already knew. But having that documentation will be useful when I file for divorce. I just need a few more months to make sure everyone understands that I tried everything before giving up on this marriage. Dr. Henley. Marcus had been tested by Dr. Henley, but not for infertility problems. He had been tested to confirm that he was fertile, to make sure that when he eventually divorced me for being unable to conceive, no one would question whether the problem might have been with him. The email continued. I know this is hard on you, having to wait while I handle things with Sarah, but trust me, it will be worth it. Once I'm free, we can start the family we both want. The family I never could have had with her. I read the email 3 times, each time feeling my anger crystallize into something colder and more focused. Marcus hadn't just been lying to me about my fertility. He had been conducting an emotional affair with a younger colleague while systematically destroying my self-worth to justify leaving me for her. There were dozens of similar emails, detailed discussions about their future together, plans for introducing Jessica to his family after a respectful period following our divorce. Even conversations about the kind of wedding they would have, apparently much more elaborate than the small ceremony Marcus and I had shared 5 years ago. In one particularly cruel message, Marcus had written, Sarah has become so depressed about the baby situation that she barely participates in family events anymore. It's actually making things easier because no one expects me to defend her when Mother makes her cutting remarks. By the time I announce the divorce, everyone will see it as inevitable and necessary. But the most damaging email was one I found, from just 2 weeks ago. The timing is perfect, Jess. I've been documenting Sarah's emotional instability for months. The way she isolates herself, the way she's become obsessed with that restaurant project instead of focusing on our marriage. Any judge will see that the breakdown of our relationship was caused by her inability to cope with her medical limitations and her refusal to accept reality. I'll get a clean divorce, maybe even spousal support from her if her restaurant venture is as successful as she thinks it will be. Spousal support. From me. Marcus was planning to divorce me, claim that my supposed infertility had caused the breakdown of our marriage, and then argue that he deserved financial support because his emotional suffering entitled him to compensation. The restaurant project that I thought had been my secret was actually known to Marcus, but he viewed it as another asset he could potentially claim in divorce proceedings. I printed every relevant email, creating a file that documented not just his infidelity, but his calculated plan to psychologically abuse me in preparation for leaving me. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Marcus had been incredibly careless with his communications, apparently so confident in his deception that he had never considered the possibility that I might discover the truth. But there was something else in his email archives that made me pause. Messages to and from his brother David, discussing family dynamics and strategy for tonight's dinner. David had apparently been uncomfortable with Marcus's treatment of me and had tried several times to suggest that maybe the infertility issue wasn't as clear-cut as Marcus was presenting it. In one exchange, David had written, I don't understand. Why you're so certain the problem is with Sarah? Have you actually seen test results, or are you just assuming? Marcus's response had been telling. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. Sarah's issues are well documented. She's just too emotional to handle the technical details, so I manage all the medical communications for her. David had replied, That seems unusual. Most women want to be directly involved in fertility discussions with their doctors. Sarah is different. She's too fragile to handle bad news directly. I'm protecting her by handling the medical side of things. But the most recent exchange between the brothers was from yesterday, and it suggested that David was becoming increasingly suspicious of Marcus's story. I've been thinking about our conversation last week, and something doesn't add up. If Sarah really has the fertility issues you've described, why haven't you guys pursued adoption or other alternatives? And why does she seem to get more depressed specifically after family gatherings where the topic comes up? It's like she only believes she's infertile when we're all talking about it. Marcus's response had been sharp. Stop playing amateur. Psychologist David, you don't understand the complexities of our situation. Sarah has been in denial about her condition, and having family discussions helps her face reality. I know it seems harsh, but sometimes tough love is necessary. It doesn't seem like tough love, Marcus. It seems like cruelty, and I'm not comfortable being part of it anymore. If you want to discuss Sarah's supposed medical issues at family dinners, you'll need to do it without my participation. The final email in the thread was from this morning. Fine, but don't interfere with tonight's dinner. Jennifer's announcement is going to be difficult enough for Sarah without you creating additional drama. David was starting to see through Marcus's deception, but he didn't have the full picture yet. He just sensed that something was wrong with how his brother was treating me. Tonight's family dinner was suddenly looking much more interesting. Jennifer's special announcement, whatever it was, would provide another opportunity for Marcus to perform his caring but suffering husband routine, while I sat there taking emotional abuse based on lies he had created. But this time, I would be watching everything with clear eyes and a completely different understanding of what was really happening. I closed Marcus's laptop and returned it to exactly the position where I had found it. The evidence I had gathered was safely printed and stored in a folder that I locked in the small safe where I kept my grandmother's jewelry and other valuables. Marcus didn't even know the safe existed, hidden as it was behind a false panel in my closet. The pregnancy test went into the same safe, along with Dr. Williams' medical notes confirming my healthy reproductive system. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was holding cards that Marcus didn't know about. The dynamic of our relationship, which had been so heavily weighted in his favor through deception and manipulation, was about to shift dramatically. But I needed to be smart about how I played those cards. Revealing everything at once might give Marcus the opportunity to spin a new narrative or cover his tracks. I needed to think strategically about timing and presentation. Tonight's dinner would be reconnaissance. I would watch Marcus perform his devoted husband of an infertile wife act, while I observed family dynamics with my new understanding of the truth. I would see how he interacted with his parents and siblings, how he positioned me in conversations, how he managed the narrative he had created, and I would begin planning his complete and total downfall. The afternoon passed slowly as I prepared for the evening. I chose my outfit carefully, something that would make me look confident and healthy rather than the subdued, apologetic style I had adopted over the past few years. A deep blue dress that brought out my eyes and complemented my complexion. Jewelry that made statements rather than whispered apologies. When I looked in the mirror, I saw flashes of the woman I used to be before Marcus's lies had slowly eroded my self-worth. The successful marketing executive who had closed deals with Fortune 500 companies. The confident woman who had once believed she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. That woman was still here, buried under years of psychological manipulation, but very much alive and very much ready to fight back. Marcus returned home at 6:30, his usual time when we had family obligations. He kissed my cheek with the same perfunctory affection, then paused to look at me more carefully. "You look different tonight. Better. Less." He searched for words. "Less what, Marcus?" "Less melancholy. That's good. I know family dinners can be difficult for you, but it's important that you make an effort. Mother has been worried about your attitude lately." His mother had been worried about my attitude. The same mother who made pointed comments about my supposed inability to give her son children. The same mother who had suggested more than once that perhaps Marcus should consider whether our marriage was really fulfilling his needs. "I'm feeling much better today," I said honestly. "Clearer about things." "Excellent. Just remember, Jennifer's announcement tonight might be sensitive for you. Try to be supportive, even if it brings up difficult feelings about our situation." Our situation. The infertility that didn't exist. The medical condition he had invented. The lie that had become the foundation of how everyone in his family viewed me. "I'll be fine, Marcus. I think I'm finally ready to hear whatever Jennifer has to share." He smiled, apparently pleased with my response. If only he knew how ready I really was. The drive to his parents' house in Westchester was unusually quiet. Marcus seemed distracted, checking his phone several times and typing quick responses. Probably coordinating with Jessica about their plans, or managing some other aspect of the elaborate deception he had been maintaining. I watched him as he drove. This man I had loved and trusted completely. This person who had systematically destroyed my confidence and self-worth for his own purposes. He looked the same as always, handsome and confident. But I was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Everything about Marcus was carefully constructed. His appearance, his charm, his stories, even his emotional reactions. He was performing the role of successful husband and devoted son, but underneath the performance was someone calculating and manipulative enough to spend years psychologically abusing his wife to serve his own agenda. The Reynolds family home was a sprawling colonial in one of Westchester's most prestigious neighborhoods. Marcus's parents, Richard and Patricia Reynolds, had built their wealth through real estate development and had never let anyone forget their success. The house was designed to impress, with its circular driveway, manicured gardens, and imposing front entrance. Tonight, as always, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest as we approached the front door. This house had become a place of humiliation for me, where my supposed inadequacies were regularly discussed and dissected, where I was treated with a mixture of pity and barely concealed irritation by people who viewed me as the obstacle to their son's happiness. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I was walking in with knowledge that would change everything. Jennifer Zhao. Car was already in the driveway, along with David's. The whole family would be here for whatever announcement she was planning to make. Marcus squeezed my hand as we walked to the door, a gesture that might have seemed supportive to an observer, but felt possessive and controlling to me. "Remember, whatever happens tonight, we face it together." Together. As if we were partners facing challenges from the outside, rather than a situation where he was the primary source of my pain. Patricia opened the door before we could ring. The bell, her smile bright and welcoming for Marcus, more restrained for me. "Sarah, dear, you look lovely tonight. Much more like your old self." My old self. The person I had been before her son had convinced me I was fundamentally broken. "Thank you, Patricia. I'm feeling much better lately." The family was gathered in the living room, their conversation animated but stopping slightly when Marcus and I entered. Jennifer was glowing with excitement, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. David was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between sympathy and concern. "Sarah!" Jennifer exclaimed, rising to give me a hug that felt genuine despite our complicated history. "I'm so glad you're here tonight. We have such wonderful news to share." I hugged her back. noting that she seemed nervous about something beyond just her announcement. There was an energy in the room that felt different from typical family gatherings, a tension that wasn't entirely positive. Richard was pouring drinks at the bar, his movements efficient and practiced. "Sarah, your usual white wine?" "Actually, I'll just have sparkling water tonight. I'm trying to be healthier." Marcus shot me a look of surprise but didn't comment. If he only knew how much healthier I was about to become. We settled into the familiar seating arrangement, Marcus and I on the sofa, his parents in their matching armchairs, Jennifer and her husband Tom on the love seat, David in the corner chair that gave him a view of the entire room. "Well," Patricia said, her voice carrying the expectation of drama, "Jennifer has something very exciting to tell us." Jennifer looked at her husband, who nodded encouragingly, then turned to address the room. "Tom and I are pregnant, 12 weeks along." The explosion of congratulations and excitement was immediate and overwhelming. Patricia actually clapped her hands together. Richard beamed with pride, and Marcus jumped up to embrace his sister with enthusiasm that seemed completely genuine. I felt Marcus's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction, expecting to see the devastation that this news would supposedly cause me. Instead, I smiled warmly and stood to congratulate Jennifer myself. "That's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you both." Jennifer hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear, "I was so worried about telling you. I know how hard this must be." "It's not hard at all," I replied, meaning it more than she could possibly understand. "I think this is exactly the right time for good news in this family." As the celebration continued around me, I watched Marcus's performance. He was playing the role of excited uncle while subtly monitoring my reactions, ready to swoop in with support if I showed signs of the emotional breakdown everyone expected. But as the evening progressed, it became clear that my composed reaction to Jennifer's news was creating some confusion among family members who had become accustomed to my supposed devastation whenever pregnancy was discussed. David, in particular, was watching me with increasing interest. During a lull in conversation, he approached me while Marcus was helping his father refill drinks. "You seem different tonight, Sarah. More like yourself." "I feel more like myself." "That's good to see. I've been worried about you lately. Some of the things that have been said." He trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Have you ever actually seen the test results that Marcus talks about? The ones that supposedly confirm your fertility issues?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. David was finally asking the question that could unravel his brother's entire deception. Before I could answer, Marcus returned with fresh drinks, immediately sensing the tension between David and me. "What are you two discussing so seriously?" David looked at his brother steadily. "I was just asking Sarah about her medical situation, specifically about whether she's seen the test results you've mentioned." Marcus's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. "That's not really appropriate dinner conversation, David." "Why not? If the test results are legitimate, then there shouldn't be any problem discussing them." The conversation was attracting attention from other family members. Patricia was watching with curiosity, while Jennifer looked uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. "The medical details are private," Marcus said firmly. "Sarah doesn't need to be put on the spot about her personal health issues." But David wasn't backing down. "That's just it, Marcus. Sarah should be the one making decisions about what's private and what's not. She should be the one with access to her own medical information." I felt the weight of everyone's attention on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this confrontation. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the opportunity to begin unraveling the web of lies Marcus had constructed. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I think David is right. I should be the one making decisions about my own medical information." Marcus's face went pale, but he tried to maintain control. "Sarah, we don't need to do this here, in front of everyone." "Do what, Marcus? Discuss my own health with my own family?" Patricia intervened, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when she wanted to control family dynamics. Perhaps this conversation would be better suited for private discussion between Sarah and Marcus. But I was done with private discussions that allowed Marcus to control the narrative. No, I think this is exactly the right place for this conversation. Because apparently, my medical condition has been a topic of family discussion for years. Everyone here has opinions about my fertility based on information that Marcus has provided. I think it's time you heard from me directly. The room fell silent, everyone recognizing that something significant was happening, even if they didn't understand exactly what. David leaned forward, his expression encouraging. "What do you want to tell us, Sarah?" I looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes before settling on Marcus, who was watching me with barely concealed panic. "I want to tell you that I've never been diagnosed with fertility issues by any doctor I've actually seen." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Patricia spoke, her voice confused. "What do you mean, dear?" "I mean that every doctor I have consulted with has told me that my reproductive system appears completely normal. I mean that I have never seen any test results suggesting otherwise. I mean that every piece of medical information about my supposed infertility has come through Marcus, never directly from any medical professional." Jennifer gasped, her hand moving to her mouth. David was staring at his brother with growing understanding and horror. Marcus tried to regain control. "Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. You know what Dr. Patterson told us about your condition." "Dr. Patterson?" "I've never met anyone named Dr. Patterson, Marcus. In fact, I can't recall ever meeting any of these specialists you claim to have consulted." Richard set down his drink with a sharp clink. "Marcus, what is she talking about?" But before Marcus could respond, David stood up, his face flushed with anger. "She's talking about the fact that you've been lying to all of us. About everything." And that's when David Reynolds decided to tell the truth that would destroy his brother's carefully constructed world. David's words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. The entire family stared at him, then at Marcus, then at me, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that had suddenly revealed itself to be completely different from what they thought they were solving. Marcus's face had gone from pale to flushed, his hands clenching at his sides. "David, you're out of line. You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" David's voice was steady, but I could see the anger building behind his calm exterior. "Because I've been doing some thinking, Marcus, and some research, and some very uncomfortable conversations with people who know things you thought they didn't." Patricia looked between her sons with growing alarm. "What research? What conversations? Someone please explain what's happening here." David turned to address his mother, but his eyes never left Marcus. "Mother, do you remember when Marcus first started talking about Sarah's fertility problems? It was about 3 years ago, right after he started working more closely with that new marketing coordinator at his firm. Jessica. David knew about Jessica." Marcus stepped forward, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "David, I'm warning you to stop this right now." "You're warning me?" David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The way you warned Dr. Henley's office not to send any correspondence directly to Sarah? The way you warned Jessica that she needed to be patient while you handled the Sarah situation? Those kinds of warnings?" The room erupted in shocked voices, everyone talking at once, but I heard Patricia's voice cut through the chaos. "Marcus, who is Jessica?" I watched my husband's face as his carefully constructed world began to crumble around him. The confident, controlling man who had spent years manipulating everyone in this room was starting to panic, and it showed in every line of his body. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said. but his voice lacked conviction. David is obviously having some kind of breakdown. These accusations are completely unfounded. Are they? David pulled out his phone and began scrolling through something. Because I have some very interesting text messages here. Messages that were accidentally sent to me instead of someone else when you were dealing with what you called a Marcus situation last month. My heart started racing. David had evidence. Actual documented evidence of Marcus's deception. Let me read this one, David continued, his voice getting stronger. From Marcus to Jessica, dated 3 weeks ago. The family dinner was perfect. Sarah barely said a word when Mother brought up grandchildren again. I think she's finally broken enough that the divorce will look like a mercy killing. Dr. Williams has been asking why Sarah hasn't been in for her annual appointment, but I've been intercepting those calls. Can't have her talking to doctors who might tell her the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer had gone completely white, her hand pressed to her mouth. Richard had set down his drink and was staring at his son with an expression of absolute horror. Patricia looked like she might faint, but it was the second part of David's revelation that made my blood run cold. Marcus had been intercepting calls from Dr. Williams. My own doctor had been trying to reach me, and Marcus had been preventing those communications from getting through. There's more, David said, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who held all the cards. Marcus, would you like to tell everyone about Dr. Henley's real report? The one that confirmed you have no fertility issues whatsoever? The one you've been using as proof that any problems in your marriage must be Sarah's fault? Marcus was now visibly shaking, his composure completely shattered. You have no right to violate my privacy. Those messages were confidential. Confidential? David's voice rose. You've been publicly humiliating your wife for 3 years based on lies, and you want to talk about privacy? You've been letting our entire family treat Sarah like she's defective because you needed a cover story for your affair, and you're concerned about your privacy? Tom, Jennifer's husband, spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. Marcus, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you haven't been lying about Sarah being infertile. Marcus looked around the room, seeing no allies, no escape route. His eyes finally settled on me, and for a moment, I saw something. That might have been genuine remorse, but it was quickly replaced by the calculating look I had learned to recognize over our years together. Even if David's accusations were true, Marcus said carefully, it doesn't change the fundamental problems in our marriage. Sarah has been distant, obsessed with her restaurant project, unwilling to work on our relationship. The fertility issue is just one aspect of our incompatibility. It was a masterful attempt at deflection, turning the conversation away from his deception and toward relationship problems that could be blamed on both of us. But I wasn't going to let him control the narrative anymore. The restaurant project you've been secretly monitoring? I asked quietly. The one you've been documenting as evidence of my supposed emotional instability? The business you've been planning to claim assets from in our divorce? Marcus's eyes widened. He knew immediately that I had discovered his emails, had seen his communications with Jessica about their future plans. The hunter had become the hunted, and he was just beginning to understand how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. How did you? He started, then stopped himself. How did I what, Marcus? How did I find out that you've been planning to divorce me for months? How did I discover that you've been telling Jessica about our most private moments? How did I learn that you've been consulting attorneys about how to get spousal support from my restaurant income? The room had gone completely silent again. Everyone was staring at Marcus, waiting for him to deny my accusations, to explain how this could all be some terrible misunderstanding. Instead, he did something that revealed the true depth of his narcissism and entitlement. He got angry. You went through my personal communications? His voice was rising, his face reddening with indignation. You violated my privacy, invaded my personal space, betrayed my trust. The audacity was breathtaking. After years of systematic lies and manipulation, after intercepting my medical communications and conducting an affair while destroying my self-worth, Marcus was outraged that I had discovered his deception. David laughed again, a sound that was becoming more bitter with each revelation. Marcus, you've got to be kidding me. You're upset about betrayed trust? You've been psychologically torturing your wife for 3 years and you're worried about your privacy? Patricia finally found her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. Marcus, is this true? Have you been lying about Sarah's medical condition? Marcus looked at his mother, the woman whose approval he had always sought, the person whose opinion mattered most to him in the world. I could see him calculating, trying to find an angle that would preserve some shred of his relationship with his family. The situation is more complicated than David is making it sound, he said carefully. Yes, I may have simplified some medical information, but it was to protect Sarah from details that would have been devastating for her to hear, directly. It was another lie, delivered with the same convincing sincerity he had used to deceive all of us for years. But this time, David was ready for him. Protect her from what, exactly? From learning that she's perfectly healthy? From discovering that the depression and self-doubt she's been experiencing were caused by your lies? From finding out that you've been setting her up for a divorce where you get to play the victim? Richard stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger that I had never seen him display before. Marcus, I want a straight answer. Have you been lying to this family about Sarah's medical condition? Yes or no? The moment stretched between father and son, 3 decades of relationship hanging in the balance. Marcus looked around the room, one more time, searching for any face that might offer support or understanding. He found none. I may have interpreted some medical information in ways that weren't entirely accurate, he said slowly. The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Jennifer started crying quietly. Tom put his arm around her shoulders and Patricia actually gasped aloud. But I wasn't satisfied with his careful phrasing, his attempt to minimize the scope of his deception. Interpreted medical information that didn't exist, Marcus? Because I've checked with every doctor you've ever mentioned, and none of them have any record of treating me for fertility issues. David nodded approvingly. That's because there never were any fertility issues. The only medical consultations Marcus had were to confirm his own fertility, which he needed documented for his plans with Jessica. Richard's voice was cold when he spoke again. Marcus, I want you to look at your wife and tell her directly what you've done. Marcus turned to face me, and for the first time in our 5-year marriage, I saw him without any pretense, without any performance, without any calculated charm. He looked small and afraid and thoroughly defeated. Sarah, he started, then stopped. I never meant for things to go this far. What things, Marcus? Be specific. The fertility story. It started as a small lie to buy me time to figure out our relationship problems, but then everyone believed it, and it became easier to let them think that than to admit I was having doubts about our marriage. It was still a lie, still a deflection that made his systematic deception sound like a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. But it was progress. And Jessica? I asked. Marcus closed his eyes. Jessica is someone I work with. We became close, maybe too close. But it wasn't about not loving you, Sarah. It was about feeling trapped in a marriage that wasn't working and not knowing how to fix it. Patricia spoke up, her voice sharp with disappointment. So, instead of talking to your wife about your feelings, you decided to convince everyone she was medically defective? Instead of seeking marriage counseling, you chose to conduct an affair and plan a divorce based on lies? Marcus had no answer for that. There was no answer that could make his actions seem reasonable or forgivable. But David wasn't finished. "There's something else the family needs to know," he said, his attention turning to me. "Sarah, have you seen a doctor recently? About anything related to the situation?" I felt my heart rate spike. David was leading somewhere, and I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "Yes," I said carefully. "I saw Dr. Williams yesterday." "And what did she tell you?" This was the moment, the revelation that would complete Marcus's destruction and begin my own vindication. I looked around the room at faces that had treated me with pity and disappointment for 3 years, at people who had believed I was the obstacle to their son's happiness. "She told me that I'm pregnant." The words hit the room like a second explosion. Jennifer actually cried out, Patricia dropped her wine glass, and Richard sat down heavily in his chair. But it was Marcus's reaction that I focused on. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, calculation, and finally, a kind of desperate hope. "Pregnant?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But that's impossible. The doctors said." "What doctors, Marcus?" David's voice was relentless. "The imaginary doctors you invented, the test results you fabricated, the specialists who never existed?" Marcus turned to look at me, and I could see him trying to process this new information, trying to figure out how it fit into his plans, how it affected his relationship with Jessica, how it changed his carefully orchestrated exit strategy. "How long?" he asked. "About 3 weeks," I answered. "Which means I conceived right around your birthday dinner, the same dinner where your mother made her comments about my supposed inability to give you children." The timing was perfect from a dramatic standpoint, but devastating from Marcus's perspective. He had spent his birthday evening performing his devoted but disappointed husband act, while I sat silently absorbing abuse based on his lies. And that same night, we had conceived the child he claimed to want so desperately, but had been telling Jessica he could never have with me. Patricia was the first to break the stunned silence. "A baby," she said softly. "Sarah, this is wonderful news." But her joy was tempered by the devastating realization of what this meant. If I was pregnant, then every cruel comment she had made about my supposed infertility, every suggestion that Marcus deserved a wife who could give him children, every moment of treating me like a failure had been based on lies her son had told. "I don't understand," Jennifer said through her tears. "If Sarah was never infertile, why did you let us treat her the way we did? Why did you let Mother say those horrible things? Why did you let me feel guilty every time I talked about wanting children?" Marcus had no answer. There was no explanation that could justify what he had done, no rationalization that could make his cruelty seem acceptable. David pulled out his phone again. "There's one more thing," he said. "Marcus, do you want to tell Jessica that your supposedly infertile wife is pregnant? Or should I do it?" The implication was clear. David had access to Jessica's contact information, which meant he had evidence of the affair that went beyond the text messages he had already revealed. Marcus's shoulders sagged in defeat. "David, please, don't involve Jessica in this any more than necessary." "Involve her?" David's voice was incredulous. "She's been involved for months. She's been part of the conspiracy to destroy Sarah's self-worth and reputation. She's been planning a future with a married man based on lies about his wife's medical condition. I'd say she's already pretty thoroughly involved." Richard stood up again, his face grave. "Marcus, I think you need to leave, now, before this gets any worse." "Dad, please. I know this looks bad, but if you'll just let me explain." "Explain what?" Richard's voice was thunderous. "Explain how you psychologically abused your wife for 3 years? Explain how you made our entire family complicit in your cruelty? Explain how you were planning to divorce a pregnant woman while making everyone believe it was her fault?" The word pregnant seemed to hit Marcus anew each time someone said, "it." His entire plan had been based on my supposed inability to conceive, and now that foundation had been completely destroyed. But more than that, he was realizing that he was about to become a father at the worst possible moment in his life. His marriage was over, his family was disgusted with him, his affair was exposed, and his reputation was in ruins. The child he claimed to want so desperately was coming at a time when he had destroyed any possibility of a happy family life. "Sarah," he said, turning to me with what might have been genuine desperation. "We need to talk. Privately. About the baby. About our future. About how we can work through this." I looked at this man who had spent years systematically destroying my confidence and self-worth, who had been planning to leave me while conducting an affair, who had just been exposed as a liar and manipulator in front of his entire family. "Marcus, there is no we anymore. There's no future for us to work through. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." "But the baby," he said, his voice breaking. "Our baby. We can start over. We can forget about all of this and focus on our family." It was the final attempt at manipulation, using the pregnancy to try to salvage something from the wreckage of his deception. But I had learned too much about who Marcus really was to ever trust him again. "The baby will be fine," I said firmly. "But you and I are finished." Patricia stood up, moving toward me with tears in her eyes. "Sarah, I am so sorry. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry for everything I said, everything I believed, everything I put you through. I don't know how to begin to make this right." Her apology was genuine, but it came 3 years too late. 3 years of cruel comments, dismissive attitudes, and treating me like a failure had done damage that couldn't be easily repaired. "I appreciate your apology, Patricia. But right now, I need to focus on my own health and well-being, and my baby's." Jennifer approached next, her face streaked with tears. "Sarah, I feel sick about how we treated you. The things I said, the way I rubbed my pregnancies in your face thinking you couldn't have children. How can you ever forgive us?" "I don't know if I can," I answered honestly. "But I'm willing to try, in time. After I've had space to process everything that's happened." David was watching Marcus with undisguised contempt. "I think Sarah's right. I think you need to leave, Marcus. Tonight. This family has a lot to discuss, and your presence is only making things worse." "This is my family too," Marcus protested. "You can't just kick me out." "Can't we?" Richard's voice was cold. "Marcus, you've betrayed everyone in this room. You've made us all complicit in treating an innocent woman, cruelly based on lies you created. You've damaged relationships that may never recover. And you've done it all to cover up an affair and set up a divorce based on fraud." The word fraud hung in the air with legal implications that made Marcus visibly flinch. "Sarah could press charges," David said quietly, "deliberately causing emotional distress through deception, fraud, maybe even malpractice if she wanted to argue that you were practicing medicine without a license by giving her false medical information." I hadn't thought about the legal implications beyond divorce proceedings, but David was right. Marcus's actions had crossed lines that went beyond marital problems into potential criminal behavior. Marcus looked around the room one final time, searching for any hint of support or sympathy. Finding none, he grabbed his coat and headed toward the door. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sarah, we'll need to discuss custody arrangements, financial support, practical matters." "Through our attorneys," I replied. "Any communication between us from now on goes through legal representatives." After Marcus left, the family sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The magnitude of what had been revealed was still sinking in, and everyone was processing their own role in the deception that had been perpetrated. Finally, Richard spoke. "Sarah, what can we do? How can we begin to make this right?" It was a question that didn't have an easy answer. The damage done over 3 years couldn't be erased with apologies and good intentions. But it was a start. "Right now, I need time," I said. "Time to process everything that's happened, time to plan for my baby's future, time to figure out what my life looks like without Marcus." "Of course," Patricia said quickly. "Whatever you need, whatever support we can provide." David leaned forward. "Sarah, I want you to know that I've been documenting Marcus's behavior for months. I have text messages, emails, phone records. If you need evidence for legal proceedings, I have enough to bury him." The offer was generous, but it also revealed something that made me curious. "David, how long have you known the truth about Marcus's lies?" He looked uncomfortable. "I started suspecting something about 6 months ago. The way you reacted to family conversations about children didn't match someone who had been dealing with infertility for years. You seemed more confused and hurt than sad, like you were hearing bad news about yourself for the first time every time it came up." 6 months. David had suspected the truth for 6 months, but hadn't said anything until tonight. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked. David's face reddened with shame. "Because I didn't want to believe it. Because Marcus is my brother, and I didn't want to accept that he was capable of something so cruel. Because I was hoping. I was wrong." It was an honest answer, but it stung. 6 months of continued psychological abuse could have been prevented if David had acted on his suspicions instead of protecting his brother. "I'm sorry," David continued. "I should have spoken up sooner. I should have protected you instead of giving Marcus the benefit of the doubt. I'll have to live with that." Jennifer was crying again, but these were different tears. "Sarah, I announced my pregnancy tonight knowing it would hurt you. I was dreading telling you because I thought it would remind you of what you couldn't have. The guilt I feel now, knowing that it was all lies." "Jennifer, you're not responsible for Marcus's deception," I said gently. "None of you are. He manipulated all of us." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it entirely. Yes, Marcus had been the architect of the deception, but the family had been willing participants in treating me cruelly based on his lies. They had found it easy to believe I was defective, easy to dismiss my worth as a wife and potential mother. Tom, who had remained quiet through most of the evening, finally spoke. "Sarah, Jennifer and I want you to know that you're welcome in our child's life, as much or as little as you're comfortable with. We understand if you need distance from the family, but we hope that eventually." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that, but right now I need to focus on my own pregnancy and my own future." As the evening wound down, practical matters began to surface. Where would I stay tonight? Marcus would likely return to our apartment, and I wasn't ready to face him again so soon. "You could stay here," Patricia offered. "Your old room is still available." The offer was kind, but the idea of spending the night in the house where I had endured years of subtle humiliation felt overwhelming. "I think I'll get a hotel room tonight," I said. "I need some space to think." David pulled out his business card and wrote something on the back. "This is my attorney's information, Victoria Chen. She specializes in family law and has experience with complex divorce cases. She's also someone I trust completely." I took the card, noting the irony that David's attorney shared my maiden name. "Thank you. I'll call her tomorrow." As I prepared to leave, Patricia caught my arm gently. "Sarah, I know you need time, and I understand if you never want to see us again, but I want you to know that this baby, your baby, is welcome in this family. Whatever happens between you and Marcus, this child is our grandchild, and we would be honored to be part of his or her life." It was a generous offer, but it came with complications I wasn't ready to think about yet. How could I maintain a relationship with Marcus's family while cutting him out of my life? How could I ensure my child had relationships with grandparents, aunts, and uncles while protecting myself from further emotional manipulation. "I'll think about it," I said. "But right now, I need to focus on immediate concerns." The drive back to the city was surreal. Less than 6 hours ago, I had been a woman trapped in an abusive marriage, believing I was fundamentally flawed, preparing to endure another evening of subtle humiliation from my husband's family. Now I was a pregnant woman whose husband's deception had been completely exposed, whose in-laws were offering apologies and support, whose future was suddenly full of possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. But the victory felt hollow in some ways. Yes, the truth had been revealed, and Marcus's lies had been exposed. But 3 years of psychological damage couldn't be undone in a single evening. The self-doubt and diminished confidence that had resulted from his manipulation would take time and effort to overcome. And there were practical matters to consider. Marcus would likely become vindictive once he recovered from tonight's shock. He would probably try to claim parental rights, while minimizing his financial responsibilities. He might attempt to salvage his relationship with Jessica by painting himself as the victim of a vindictive wife who had trapped him with an unexpected pregnancy. I needed to be prepared for a fight, and I needed to be smarter and more strategic than Marcus had been. Fortunately, I had advantages he didn't know about yet. The hotel I chose was a boutique property in Soho, close to the restaurant space I had been developing. As I checked in under my maiden name, I felt a symbolic significance to the choice. Sarah Chen was reclaiming her identity, separate from Marcus Reynolds and his family's expectations. My room was on the 15th floor with a view of the city lights. As I stood at the window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline, I placed my hand on my still flat stomach and made a silent promise to my unborn child. This baby would be born into a world where truth mattered more than convenient lies. Where documentation and evidence trumped manipulation and gaslighting. Where a mother's love would provide protection against those who sought to diminish or control. Marcus had unknowingly given me the greatest gift possible when he chose to base his deception on my supposed infertility. He had provided me with irrefutable proof of his cruelty and manipulation. He had created evidence that would serve me well in the legal battles to come. And most importantly, he had underestimated me so completely that he had no idea what I was capable of when fighting for my child's future. The pregnancy test I had taken that morning felt like it had happened days ago. So much had changed in such a short time. But as I prepared for bed in my hotel room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that would be entirely my own creation. Marcus had tried to destroy me with lies, but instead, he had given me the motivation and evidence I needed to build something better than anything we had ever shared. The investigation into Marcus's deception was just beginning, but I already knew how it would end. With truth triumphant over lies, with justice served, and with a new life beginning free from the shadows of his manipulation. My phone buzzed, with a text message from Elena, my best friend who had always suspected something wasn't right about Marcus's story. "I've been thinking about our conversation today. Whatever you're planning to do about Marcus, I'm here to help. Whatever you need?" I smiled as I typed my response. "Meet me for breakfast tomorrow. I have a lot to tell you, and I'm going to need all the support I can get for what comes next." The wheels of justice were about to turn, and Marcus Reynolds was going to discover that destroying someone's life based on lies carried consequences he had never imagined. Victoria Chen's law office occupied the 32nd floor of a gleaming tower in Midtown Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city. When I walked into her reception area at 9 o'clock sharp the morning, after the family dinner, I felt like I was stepping into the beginning of a new chapter of my life. Victoria herself was nothing like what I had expected. David had described her as brilliant and ruthless, which had conjured images of a stern, intimidating woman in severe business attire. Instead, I was greeted by someone closer to my own age. with warm brown eyes and an immediately welcoming presence. She was impeccably dressed but approachable, professional but not cold. "Sarah," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip. "David told me about your situation. I'm so sorry you've had to endure what you've been through, but I want you to know that we're going to make sure Marcus faces the full consequences of his actions." Her confidence was reassuring, but I could tell she was carefully observing my demeanor, probably assessing whether I had the emotional strength to handle the legal battle ahead. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I said as she led me into her office, which was decorated with law degrees, family photos, and what appeared to be artwork created by children. "David's referrals always get priority," she replied, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs arranged around a small conference table. "But more than that, cases like yours are exactly why I became a family law attorney. Men like Marcus rely on their victims being too broken or too isolated to fight back effectively." She poured coffee from an elegant service set and settled across from me with a legal pad already covered in notes. "David gave me a preliminary overview of the situation, but I'd like to hear everything from your perspective. Start wherever feels comfortable." I began with the pregnancy test discovery and worked through the timeline chronologically, watching Victoria take detailed notes as I described Marcus's systematic deception, the medical lies, the intercepted communications, and the revelation at the family dinner. She occasionally asked clarifying questions, but mostly she listened with the focused attention of someone who understood the legal implications of every detail. When I finished, Victoria set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Sarah, what Marcus has done to you constitutes several forms of abuse and potentially criminal behavior. We're talking about fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, possibly even practicing medicine without a license depending on how broadly we want to interpret his medical claims. David mentioned that last night, but I'm not necessarily interested in criminal charges. I just want to be free of Marcus and protect my baby's future." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable, and we can certainly focus on civil remedies. But I want you to understand the full scope of your options. The stronger our case, the better our negotiating position when it comes to divorce settlement and custody arrangements." She opened a file folder and pulled out several documents. David provided me with copies of the text messages and emails he obtained. These are incredibly damaging to Marcus's credibility and establish a clear pattern of deception and manipulation. I reviewed the documents. Seeing Marcus's words in black and white made his betrayal feel even more stark and calculated. The casual cruelty of his messages to Jessica, the detailed planning for my emotional destruction, the complete absence of any genuine concern for my well-being. "There's something else," I said, pulling out the printed emails I had discovered on Marcus's laptop. I found these on his personal computer. Victoria's eyebrows rose as she read through the additional evidence. "Sarah, this is even better than what David provided. These emails establish premeditation, document the affair comprehensively, and show Marcus's intent to defraud you in divorce proceedings." "How strong is our case?" "Extremely strong. Possibly the strongest case of this type I've ever handled. Marcus has essentially documented his own misconduct so thoroughly that he's made our job easy." Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city as she spoke. "Here's what I recommend we do immediately. First, we file for divorce on grounds of cruel and inhuman treatment, supported by all of this evidence. Second, we seek immediate spousal support, not because you need it financially, but because it establishes Marcus as the responsible party for the marriage breakdown." She returned to her seat and continued outlining our strategy. "Third, we file a motion for temporary custody arrangements that give you primary physical custody of the child when born, with Marcus having supervised visitation until we can establish that he's not a danger to the child's emotional well-being." Can we really argue that he's a danger to the baby? Absolutely. A man who spent 3 years systematically psychologically abusing the child's mother, who conducted an affair while planning to abandon his family, who lied about medical information that could have affected pregnancy planning. That man has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that courts take very seriously when evaluating parental fitness. The conversation continued for over an hour as Victoria explained the legal process ahead. Filing procedures, discovery requests, depositions, potential trial dates. It was overwhelming, but also empowering to understand that I had legal recourse for what Marcus had done to me. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Victoria said as our meeting began to wind down. "Marcus is going to fight back, and he's going to try to control the narrative publicly and privately. Are you prepared for him to make your life difficult in ways beyond the legal proceedings?" I thought about the question carefully. What kinds of things should I expect? He might try to paint you as vindictive or unstable. He might claim the pregnancy was planned to trap him or manipulate him. He might reach out to your professional contacts to damage your business reputation. Men like Marcus don't accept defeat gracefully. The warning was sobering, but not unexpected. Marcus had spent years controlling every aspect of how our relationship was perceived by others. He wouldn't give up that control without a fight. "I understand, but I'm not the same woman I was a week ago. I'm not going to be intimidated or manipulated anymore." Victoria smiled approvingly. "Good. That's exactly the attitude you'll need. And remember, we have documentation of everything Marcus has done. If he tries to harass you or retaliate, it just adds to our case against him." As I prepared to leave Victoria's office, she handed me a card with her direct contact information. "Sarah, I want you to call me immediately if Marcus contacts you directly, if he shows up at your home or business, if he does anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe. Don't try to handle him on your own." "I will. Thank you for everything. We're just getting started. By the time we're finished with Marcus Reynolds, he's going to regret every lie he ever told about you." The confidence in Victoria's voice was exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time since discovering Marcus's deception, I felt like I had an advocate who was as committed to justice as I was. My next stop was the restaurant space in Soho, where I had scheduled a meeting with my construction contractor and interior designer. The timing might have seemed odd given everything that was happening in my personal life, but the restaurant project had taken on new significance. It wasn't just a business venture anymore. It was proof of my independence, evidence that I had been building a life separate from Marcus even while he was tearing me down. The space was a former textile warehouse with exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors, and enormous windows that filled the room with natural light. When I had first seen it 18 months ago, I had immediately envisioned how it could be transformed into an intimate dining experience that showcased innovative fusion cuisine. Marcus had never seen the space. He knew about the restaurant, project in general terms, but I had deliberately kept the details private, instinctively protecting this dream from his potential interference or criticism. Now, walking through the partially renovated interior with contractor Luis Martinez and designer Amanda Foster, I felt a fierce pride in what I had created entirely on my own. "The kitchen equipment installation is ahead of schedule," Luis reported, showing me progress photos on his tablet. "We should be ready for your first staff training sessions by the end of next month." Amanda was equally optimistic about the interior design timeline. The custom lighting fixtures arrived yesterday, and the furniture delivery is scheduled for next week. "Everything is coming together beautifully, Sarah." As we walked through the space, discussing final details and last-minute adjustments, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with Marcus or his opinions of my capabilities. This restaurant was entirely mine, funded by my inheritance, designed according to my vision, staffed by people I had personally recruited. "There's something else I need to discuss with both of you," I said as we concluded our walkthrough. "My personal situation has become complicated, and there's a possibility that my ex-husband might try to interfere with the restaurant project." Luis and Amanda exchanged concerned glances. What kind of interference? Amanda asked. He might claim ownership interest in the business, or he might try to contact vendors and contractors to disrupt our timeline. I want you both to know that all contracts and financial arrangements go through me exclusively, and any communications from Marcus Reynolds should be reported to me immediately. Luis nodded seriously. Understood. All our contracts are with you personally, not with any marital entity, so there shouldn't be any legal confusion about ownership. That's exactly what I hope to hear. Amanda was taking notes on her phone. Should we alert the other vendors about this situation? I think that would be wise. Nothing dramatic, just a note that any changes to the project must be approved by me directly. As I left the restaurant space, I felt energized rather than overwhelmed by the challenges ahead. Yes, I was facing a difficult divorce and custody battle. Yes, Marcus might try to make my life complicated, but I had legal representation, family support, and a thriving business that proved my competence and independence. My phone buzzed with a text message from Elena asking about lunch plans. I realized I hadn't eaten anything since the previous evening, which probably wasn't ideal given my pregnancy. The thought of my baby made me smile, despite everything else that was happening. In 6 months, I would be holding my child, and Marcus's lies would be nothing but an unpleasant memory. Elena had suggested meeting at a quiet cafe in Greenwich Village, away from our usual spots in Midtown, where we might encounter people from Marcus's professional circle. When I arrived, she was already waiting at a corner table with a concerned expression that immediately softened into relief when she saw me. "You look better than I expected," she said as I sat down. "Actually, you look better than you have in months." "I feel better than I have in months, maybe years." Elena had been my closest friend since college, and she had watched Marcus gradually diminish my confidence and social connections over the course of our marriage. She had never directly criticized him, but she had made subtle comments over the years that suggested she saw through his charm to something less admirable underneath. "Tell me everything," she said as soon as we had ordered. "Your text last night was mysterious, but you sounded different, stronger." I related the events of the previous evening, watching Elena's expressions shift from shock to outrage to satisfaction as the story unfolded. When I described Marcus's complete humiliation in front of his family, she actually applauded quietly. "I never liked him," she said bluntly when I finished. "I know I never said anything directly, but Marcus always seemed like he was performing rather than actually being genuine. And the way he treated you, especially recently, it was like he was deliberately trying to make you smaller." "Why didn't you say something?" Elena looked uncomfortable. "Because you seemed to love him, and I didn't want to be the friend who was constantly criticizing your husband. But also because Marcus was very subtle about how he undermined you. It wasn't obvious abuse that I could point to. It was more like death by 1,000 small cuts." Her observation was painfully accurate. Marcus had been masterful at making his manipulation seem like care, his control seem like protection, his criticism seem like helpful guidance. "But there were signs," Elena continued. "The way you stopped talking about your career ambitions, the way you started apologizing for everything, the way you isolated yourself from friends who questioned Marcus's version of events." "I isolated myself from friends?" "Sarah, you haven't had a girls' night out in over a year. You canceled our last 3 planned vacations. You stopped coming to book club, stopped joining group dinners, stopped participating in activities where Marcus wasn't welcome or wouldn't be the center of attention." I hadn't realized how thoroughly Marcus had succeeded in cutting me off from my support network. The isolation had been so gradual that I hadn't noticed it happening. "But the restaurant project," Elena continued with growing excitement, "that was you fighting back, whether you realized it or not. You were creating something that was entirely yours, rebuilding your independence even while Marcus was trying to destroy it." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our food. But I found myself thinking about Elena's interpretation of my actions. Had I been unconsciously preparing for independence even before discovering Marcus's lies? Had some part of me recognized that my marriage was unsustainable? "Elena, I need to ask you for a favor," I said after the server left. "Marcus is going to try to retaliate for what happened last night, and he might try to contact our mutual friends to spread his version of events. If anyone asks you about our divorce, I need you to stick to basic facts and not engage with gossip or speculation." "Of course. But Sarah, our friends aren't stupid. Anyone who's spent time with both of you has probably noticed that Marcus treats you badly. I don't think his charm is as effective as he believes it is." That was reassuring to hear, but I knew Marcus could be very convincing when he wanted to be. He had spent years perfecting his image as the devoted husband married to a tragically infertile wife. "There's something else," I said, lowering my voice even though we were in a relatively private corner of the cafe. "I'm pregnant." Elena's fork clattered to her plate. "What?" "Sarah, that's incredible. But wait, doesn't that completely destroy Marcus's story about you being infertile?" "Completely. Which is why he's going to be desperate to control how this information gets out. He might try to claim the pregnancy was a result of fertility treatments, or that it's a miracle that proves he was right to never give up hope, or any number of other lies designed to make himself look good. Are you going to let him be involved in the baby's life?" It was a question I had been avoiding thinking about directly. "I don't know yet. Legally, he has parental rights unless I can prove he's unfit. But emotionally, I can't imagine trusting him with our child after what he's done to me." Elena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm here to support you. And Sarah, for what it's worth, I think you're going to be an amazing mother. You're strong and smart and loving, and this baby is lucky to have you." The affirmation meant more to me than Elena probably realized. After years of Marcus's subtle undermining, having someone express confidence in my abilities felt like a revelation. After lunch, I walked the few blocks to Dr. Williams's office for my follow-up appointment. The receptionist greeted me warmly, with no indication that Marcus had been successful in intercepting communications from the practice. Dr. Williams was equally warm when she called me back to her office, but I could see concern in her expression as she reviewed my chart. "Sarah, I have to ask about something unusual. My office has received several calls over the past few months from someone claiming to be your husband, asking for detailed information about your reproductive health and asking us not to contact you directly about scheduling appointments." The confirmation of Marcus's interference in my medical care made my anger flare again. "Dr. Williams, I need to tell you something important about my situation." I explained Marcus's deception and the revelation at the family dinner, watching her expression shift from confusion to outrage as the scope of his lies became clear. "This is unconscionable," she said when I finished. "Sarah, I want you to know that you have never, at any point, shown any signs of fertility issues. Your reproductive system is completely healthy, your hormone levels are normal, and there has never been any medical basis for the claims your husband has been making. Can you document that officially, for legal purposes?" "Absolutely. I'll prepare a comprehensive report detailing your medical history and confirming that you have never been diagnosed with any fertility issues. This is exactly the kind of medical fraud that I'm required to report to professional ethics boards." The appointment continued with routine pregnancy care, but Dr. Williams's outrage on my behalf was oddly comforting. It validated my own anger and confirmed that Marcus's behavior was beyond the pale even for medical professionals who had seen everything. As I left the doctor's office, I felt like I was collecting allies and evidence everywhere I went. Victoria. The attorney, Elena the friend, Dr. Williams the medical professional, Luis and Amanda the business partners. All of them were ready to support me and protect me from Marcus's continued manipulation. My phone rang as I walked toward the subway station. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, which surprised me given Victoria's advice about avoiding direct communication. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately called Victoria to report the contact attempt. "Good instincts," she said approvingly. "Don't respond to anything from Marcus directly. If he leaves a voicemail, forward it to me. Every contact he makes becomes evidence of his refusal to respect boundaries." The voicemail notification appeared on my phone as I was talking to Victoria. I played it on speaker so she could hear it too. Marcus's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear desperation underneath the calm surface. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happened last night. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but we can't let emotions destroy our family. The baby changes everything. We need to think about what's best for our child." Victoria was already taking notes. "Classic manipulation tactics. He's trying to position himself as the rational parent thinking about the child's welfare, while implying that you're being emotional and destructive." Should I respond? Absolutely not. Let him dig his hole deeper with more messages like this one. Every time he contacts you directly after being told to communicate through attorneys, it demonstrates his refusal to respect boundaries. As I made my way home to the hotel, I reflected on how much my life had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I had been a woman trapped in an abusive marriage, believing I was fundamentally flawed, preparing to endure another evening of humiliation. Today, I was a pregnant woman with legal representation, family support, and a clear path forward toward independence and justice. Marcus's carefully constructed world of lies had collapsed completely, but my own world was just beginning to take shape. The hotel concierge greeted me with a message that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Chen, there was a gentleman here earlier asking about you. He claimed to be your husband and said he needed to deliver something to your room urgently. Did you give him any information?" "Of course not. Hotel policy requires written authorization for any information about our guests. But he was quite persistent and seemed agitated when we couldn't help him." Marcus was already starting his campaign of harassment and intimidation, but this time I was ready for him. I called Victoria immediately to report the incident, and she assured me that Marcus's behavior would only strengthen our case against him. "Document everything," she advised. "Times, dates, witnesses. Marcus is showing us exactly who he really is, and judges don't like men who harass pregnant women." That evening, as I sat in my hotel room looking out over the city lights, I felt a sense of anticipation rather than dread about the challenges ahead. Marcus had revealed his true nature, but he had also revealed his weaknesses. He was desperate, he was sloppy, and he had underestimated me completely. The confrontation phase of this battle was just beginning, but I already knew how it would end. With truth triumphant over lies, with justice served, and with a new life beginning free from the shadows of his deception, Marcus Reynolds was about to discover that destroying someone's life based on lies carried consequences he had never imagined. And I was going to make sure he faced every single one of them. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after the family dinner that had changed everything. As I sat in the courthouse waiting area with Victoria, I watched Marcus pace near the elevator bank, his usual confidence replaced by the frantic energy of someone whose world was crumbling around him. He had hired Benjamin Walsh, one of Manhattan's most expensive divorce attorneys, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking our legal action. Walsh was known for representing wealthy men who wanted to minimize their financial exposure in high-conflict divorces, which meant Marcus was already thinking about protecting his assets rather than trying to reconcile. "He looks desperate," Victoria observed quietly, following my gaze toward Marcus and his attorney. "That's good for us. Desperate people make mistakes." Marcus had made several mistakes already. Since our confrontation at his parents' house, he had violated Victoria's explicit instructions about communicating only through attorneys. He had left 4 more voicemails, sent a dozen text messages, and had even shown up at my hotel twice more trying to speak with me directly. Each contact was carefully documented and would be presented to the judge as evidence of his inability to respect boundaries or follow court orders. "Remember," Victoria said as we prepared to enter the courtroom, "speak only when the judge addresses you directly. Let me handle Marcus's attorney, and whatever Marcus says, no matter how provocative or false, don't react emotionally." Judge Patricia Moreland was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen every possible variation of human behavior in her courtroom. As she reviewed our emergency motion for temporary orders, I could see her expression growing increasingly stern. "Mr. Walsh," she said to Marcus's attorney, "your client is seeking joint physical custody of an unborn child and claiming that Mrs. Reynolds' pregnancy announcement was timed to interfere with planned marital reconciliation. Can you explain the factual basis for these claims?" Walsh stood with practiced composure, but I could tell he was uncomfortable with the evidence he had to work with. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that there have been communication difficulties in the marriage, but he disputes the characterization of his behavior as abusive or manipulative. The pregnancy represents an opportunity for the couple to rebuild their relationship around their shared commitment to their child." Judge Moreland's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Walsh, have you reviewed the exhibits submitted by Mrs. Reynolds' counsel? Specifically the text messages and emails documenting your client's 3-year campaign of medical deception?" "Your Honor, those communications are taken out of context and represent private venting between spouses during a difficult period. They don't constitute the pattern of abuse that opposing counsel alleges." Victoria stood to respond, her voice calm but carrying an edge of controlled anger. "Your Honor, there is no context in which systematically lying to your spouse about their medical condition for 3 years constitutes normal marital difficulties. Mr. Reynolds deliberately intercepted medical communications, fabricated fertility issues, and used these lies to psychologically abuse his wife while conducting an extramarital affair." The judge turned to address Marcus directly. "Mr. Reynolds, did you tell your wife and family members that she was infertile when you knew this was not true?" Marcus's lawyer started to object, but Judge Moreland held up her hand. "I want to hear from your client directly, Mr. Walsh." Marcus stood slowly, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Your Honor, the situation is more complicated than my wife is making it sound. I may have simplified some medical information to protect her from unnecessary stress during a difficult time in our marriage." Simplified medical information by claiming she was infertile when she was not? "I believed there were fertility challenges based on our inability to conceive quickly. Mr. Reynolds, the evidence shows that you consulted with Dr. Henley to confirm your own fertility while telling everyone your wife was the problem. You intercepted calls from her gynecologist. You documented your plans to use fake infertility as grounds for divorce. How do you explain these actions?" Marcus was clearly struggling to find an answer that didn't make him sound either malicious or insane. "Your Honor, I was confused and made poor decisions during a stressful period. But I never intended to harm my wife, and I believe we can work through these issues for the sake of our child." Judge Moreland's expression made it clear that she was not impressed with Marcus's explanation. She turned to Victoria. "Counselor, what specific orders are you seeking?" "Your Honor, we're requesting temporary exclusive use of the marital residence, temporary spousal support, an order requiring Mr. Reynolds to communicate only through counsel, and most importantly, an order establishing Mrs. Reynolds as the primary custodial parent when the child is born, with any visitation for Mr. Reynolds to be supervised until such time as the court can evaluate his fitness as a parent." Walsh jumped up to object. "Your Honor, there's no evidence that my client poses any danger to the unborn child. Supervised visitation is an extreme measure typically reserved for cases involving documented violence or substance abuse." Victoria had anticipated this argument. "Your Honor, psychological abuse is still abuse. A man who spent 3 years systematically destroying his wife's mental health cannot be trusted alone with a vulnerable infant. The pattern of manipulation and control, documented in Mr. Reynolds' own words, demonstrates exactly the kind of behavior that courts must protect children from experiencing. Judge Moreland spent several minutes reviewing the exhibits Victoria had submitted, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions about specific documents. The courtroom was silent, except for the rustling of papers and the muffled sounds of traffic from the street below. Finally, she looked up and addressed both parties. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted by both sides, and I find Mrs. Reynolds' claims to be well documented and credible. Mr. Reynolds, your behavior toward your wife over the past 3 years is deeply troubling and demonstrates a pattern of psychological manipulation that this court cannot ignore." Marcus's face went pale, but Judge Moreland continued without pausing. "I'm granting Mrs. Reynolds temporary exclusive use of the marital residence, temporary spousal support in the amount of $8,000 per month, and an order prohibiting Mr. Reynolds from contacting Mrs. Reynolds except through counsel. Additionally, when the child is born, Mrs. Reynolds will have primary physical custody, with Mr. Reynolds limited to supervised visitation pending a full custody evaluation." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the courtroom. Marcus slumped in his chair while Walsh whispered urgently in his ear, probably explaining their options for appeal. As we gathered our materials to leave, Victoria was already planning our next steps. "This is an excellent start, Sarah. The temporary orders establish the framework for permanent arrangements, and Judge Moreland's comments make it clear that she sees through Marcus's attempts at manipulation." Outside the courthouse, Marcus caught up with us near the steps, ignoring his attorney's attempts to restrain him. "Sarah, please, we need to talk about this like adults. You can't seriously intend to keep me away from my own child." Victoria stepped between us immediately. "Mr. Reynolds, you are in direct violation of the court order that was just issued. Any further contact with my client will be reported to Judge Moreland as contempt of court." Marcus's face reddened with frustration and embarrassment as nearby, pedestrians began to notice the confrontation. "This is insane. I'm being punished for trying to protect my wife's feelings. Sarah, you know I never meant to hurt you." I looked at this man who had spent 3 years systematically destroying my self-worth, who had conducted an affair while making me believe I was defective, who had documented his plans to abandon me and claim financial support from my business. "Marcus, you didn't try to protect my feelings. You tried to control my reality. There's a difference." Walsh finally succeeded in pulling his client away, but not before Marcus called back over his shoulder. "You'll regret this, Sarah. When our child asks why Daddy can't come home, you'll have to explain how your vindictiveness destroyed our family." Even in defeat, Marcus was trying to manipulate the situation by claiming I was the one destroying our family rather than accepting responsibility for his own actions. Victoria was taking notes on her phone as we walked away from the courthouse. "Perfect. He just demonstrated exactly the kind of behavior that convinced Judge Moreland to grant our motions. Marcus can't help himself from trying to control and manipulate, even when it's actively hurting his legal position." The victory felt surreal as we made our way back to Victoria's office to discuss next steps. Less than 2 weeks ago, I had been trapped in an abusive marriage, believing I was fundamentally flawed. Now I had legal protection, financial support, and custody arrangements that would protect my unborn child from Marcus's manipulation. "What happens next?" I asked as we settled back into Victoria's conference room. "Discovery phase," she replied, pulling out a thick folder. "We'll request all of Marcus's financial records, employment files, communication records, and medical records. We want to build a comprehensive picture of his deception and ensure there are no other lies or affairs we don't know about yet." The thought that there might be additional deceptions I hadn't discovered yet was sobering. If Marcus had been capable of such elaborate lies about my fertility, what else might he have been hiding? "I also want to depose Jessica," Victoria continued. if she was a willing participant in the affair and knew about Marcus's lies regarding your supposed infertility, she could be liable for intentional interference with your marriage. Can we really sue Jessica? Potentially. If we can prove she knew Marcus was lying about your medical condition and participated in the affair, anyway, that could constitute intentional infliction of emotional distress. Plus, any financial benefits she received from Marcus during the affair could be recoverable as marital assets. The afternoon was spent planning our discovery strategy and preparing for Marcus's likely responses to the temporary orders. Victoria predicted he would try to paint me as vindictive and unstable, possibly claiming that my pregnancy was planned to trap him, or that my business success was somehow dependent on his connections. He's going to try to rewrite history, she warned. Marcus will claim that he was the supportive husband trying to help his emotionally fragile wife cope with fertility issues. He'll say the affair with Jessica was emotional support during a difficult time. He'll argue that you're using the pregnancy as a weapon against him. But all of these strategies required ignoring the documented evidence of his systematic deception, which would be difficult to explain away to a judge who had already seen through his manipulation. As evening approached, I realized I would be returning to the apartment Marcus and I had shared for the first time since the family dinner. The court order gave me exclusive use of the residence, but the thought of being in that space again felt emotionally complicated. Elena had offered to come with me, and Victoria recommended having a witness present when I reclaimed possession of the apartment. Document everything, she advised. Take photos of how Marcus left things. Note any missing items, and don't clean up or organize anything until you've created a complete record. The apartment felt different when I walked through the door with Elena beside me. What had once felt like home now seemed like a stage set for a performance that was finally over. Marcus's clothes were gone from the bedroom closet, his toiletries cleared from the bathroom, his desk emptied of personal items. But he had left behind subtle signs of his anger and contempt. Family photos had been removed from their frames, leaving behind empty silver rectangles on side tables and bookshelves. My grandmother's china, which we had displayed in the dining room cabinet, had been packed away and stored in the basement. Even my favorite cooking knives were missing from the kitchen. He's being petty, Elena observed as we documented the missing items. Taking things he knows have sentimental value to you, even though they have no practical value to him. In his home office, I discovered that Marcus had attempted to delete files from the computer we shared, though his technical skills weren't sophisticated enough to eliminate them completely. A quick check revealed that he had tried to erase financial records, correspondence, and even photos from our early relationship. The attempted cover-up was more evidence of his guilt and his recognition that his behavior wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. But there were also discoveries that I hadn't expected. In Marcus's desk drawer, I found a notebook filled with detailed observations about my daily routines, my emotional states, and my interactions with family and friends. He had been documenting my behavior for months, apparently building a case for my supposed emotional instability. The entries were chilling in their clinical detachment. Sarah seemed withdrawn during dinner with Mother, didn't participate in conversation about Jennifer's pregnancy plans, evidence of ongoing depression about fertility situation. Or Sarah spent 3 hours working on restaurant plans instead of attending to household responsibilities. Obsessive behavior regarding business project continues. Every normal human emotion or personal interest had been pathologized and recorded as evidence of my unfitness as a wife. Marcus had been building a case against me long before the family dinner, documenting what he planned to use as proof of my emotional problems. Elena read over my shoulder, her expression growing more horrified with each entry. Sarah, this is stalking behavior. He was monitoring and analyzing your every move like you were a laboratory subject. I photographed every page of the notebook, knowing it would be valuable evidence for Victoria. Marcus's obsessive documentation of my supposed flaws would actually demonstrate his own psychological instability and controlling behavior. The Apartment tour continued with more disturbing discoveries. In the bedroom, I found printouts of my credit card statements with certain charges highlighted in red ink. Marcus had been monitoring my spending on the restaurant project, apparently trying to calculate how much money he might be able to claim in divorce proceedings. He had also printed my emails with contractors and vendors, annotating them with notes about potential cost overruns or schedule delays. My private business communications had been surveillance material for his planned divorce strategy. "How long do you think he's been planning this?" Elena asked as we finished documenting. "Everything. Months, maybe longer. The notebook entries go back almost a year." That realization was devastating in a new way. While I had been struggling with self-doubt and depression caused by his lies about my fertility, Marcus had been coldly planning my emotional destruction and financial exploitation. But as the initial shock wore off, I began to feel something unexpected: relief. The notebook and surveillance materials were so clearly inappropriate and invasive that they actually strengthened my case against Marcus. His own documentation revealed him to be controlling, manipulative, and potentially mentally unstable. Victoria had been right when she said desperate people make mistakes. Marcus's attempts to build a case against me had actually created evidence of his own unfitness as a husband and potential father. Elena and I finished our documentation just as the sun was setting over Manhattan. As we prepared to leave, I took one final walk through the apartment that had been my home for 3 years. The space felt hollow now, emptied not just of Marcus's belongings, but of the false narrative that had defined our relationship. The elegant furniture and expensive artwork that had once impressed visitors now seemed like props in a performance that had finally ended. But there was also a sense of possibility in the emptiness. This apartment could become something new, something authentically mine rather than a showcase for Marcus's image. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Reynolds asking if we could talk privately. The message was carefully worded and respectful, acknowledging the court proceedings while expressing her desire to maintain a relationship with her future grandchild. I showed the message to Elena, who read it thoughtfully. "What do you think she wants?" "Probably to apologize more comprehensively and to make sure she'll have access to the baby. But I'm not ready for that conversation yet. The relationship with Marcus's family would need to be rebuilt slowly and carefully. They had been complicit in the psychological abuse, even if they hadn't known they were participating in a lie. Trust would have to be earned rather than assumed." As we left the apartment building, I realized I was walking away from more than just a physical space. I was leaving behind the version of myself that had accepted diminishment, that had believed I was fundamentally flawed, that had allowed someone else to define my worth and potential. The woman walking out of that building was someone different, someone who demanded truth instead of accepting convenient lies, someone who valued her own judgment instead of deferring to manipulation disguised as expertise. Elena and I had dinner at a quiet restaurant near her apartment, where we talked about practical matters like finding a new place to live and planning for the baby's arrival. But underneath the logistics was a deeper conversation about identity and transformation. "You know what's remarkable?" Elena said as we shared dessert. "You were planning your escape even before you knew you needed to escape. The restaurant, keeping your finances separate, maintaining your professional network. Some part of you knew this marriage wasn't sustainable." She was right. The choices I had made over the past 18 months had created the foundation for independence even while I was consciously trying to save my marriage. My subconscious had been smarter than my conscious mind. "I think I'm going to buy a place in Soho," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. "Near the restaurant. Somewhere I can walk to work, somewhere that's entirely mine." That sounds perfect. A fresh start in every sense. As the evening wound down, I felt a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical demands of pregnancy and legal proceedings. The emotional labor of rebuilding my sense of self after years of systematic manipulation was more draining than I had expected, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based entirely on my own judgment and desires. I was choosing where to live, how to spend my time, and whom to trust without having to consider how those choices would be perceived or controlled by Marcus. The hotel room that had been my temporary refuge for the past week now felt like a launching pad rather than a hiding place. Tomorrow I would start looking at apartments. Next week I would interview additional staff for the restaurant. Next month I would have my second prenatal appointment and begin preparing for the reality of single motherhood. All of these challenges felt manageable because they were challenges I was choosing, rather than problems being imposed on me by someone else's deception. Marcus had tried to destroy me with lies, but instead he had freed me to become someone stronger and more authentic than I had ever been before. My phone buzzed with a final message of the day, this one from David Reynolds. I wanted you to know that the family is completely supportive of your decisions. Marcus made his bed, and now he has to lie in it. Looking forward to meeting my niece, or nephew when the time comes. The message was a reminder that not all of my relationships with the Reynolds family needed to be collateral damage from Marcus's deception. People of integrity could acknowledge mistakes, make amends, and rebuild trust through actions rather than words. As I prepared for bed in my hotel room, I placed my hand on my still flat stomach and made another silent promise to my unborn child. This baby would be born into a world where truth mattered, where documentation trumped manipulation, and where a mother's love would provide protection against those who sought to control through lies. Marcus had spent 3 years trying to convince me that I was broken, that I was incapable of giving him what he needed, that I was the obstacle to his happiness and success. But I was about to give him something he truly hadn't expected, a child who would grow up knowing the difference between love and manipulation, between truth and convenient fiction, between partnership and control. The victory in court had been just the beginning. The real triumph would be measured in years rather than days, in the kind of person my child became and the kind of life we built together. Marcus Reynolds had tried to destroy my future with lies, but instead he had given me the motivation and evidence I needed to build something better than anything we had ever shared together. 2 years later, I stood on the rooftop terrace of my Soho loft, watching my 18-month-old daughter Maya take her first wobbly steps toward me. Her delighted laughter filled the air as she tumbled into my arms, her dark eyes sparkling with the same determination I had discovered within myself during those dark months of deception and revelation. The restaurant below us was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. Lotus Fusion had earned a James Beard nomination and was booked solid for the next 3 months. The success felt deeply satisfying, not just professionally but personally. Every positive review, every packed dining room, every award nomination was proof that I had built something meaningful entirely on my own merit. Marcus had been absent from Maya's life by his own choice. After the supervised visitation order was finalized, he had exercised his rights exactly 3 times before deciding that fatherhood was too complicated given his new life in Seattle. He had relocated there with Jessica 6 months after our divorce was finalized, claiming he needed a fresh start away from the toxic environment his family had created. The child support payments arrived promptly each month, transferred automatically from his account to mine without any personal communication. It was the perfect arrangement as far as I was concerned. Maya deserved financial support from her father, but she also deserved protection from his manipulation and narcissism. Patricia and Richard Reynolds had worked hard to rebuild their relationship with me, and they had become devoted grandparents to Maya. They visited monthly, always respectful of boundaries, always careful not to make excuses for Marcus's behavior. The forgiveness hadn't come easily, but their genuine remorse and consistent actions had gradually earned back my trust. David remained one of my closest allies. He had testified at the custody hearing about Marcus's pattern of deception, and his courage in exposing his own brother's lies had been instrumental in securing the protective orders that kept Maya safe. from potential psychological manipulation. My phone buzzed with a notification from the fertility support group I had started 6 months after Maya's birth. 3 more women had joined this week, all of them dealing with husbands who had been lying about medical issues to control their relationships. The group met weekly in the private dining room of my restaurant, offering support and resources to women discovering they weren't as broken as they had been told. Elena knocked on the terrace door, carrying coffee and the morning newspapers. "The Times Review is in," she announced with a grin, spreading the paper on the outdoor table. The review was glowing, praising not just the innovative cuisine, but the restaurant's commitment to supporting women entrepreneurs through our mentorship program. The journalist had somehow discovered the story behind my business, though the details of my personal life remained private. Maya crawled over to investigate the newspaper, her tiny hands grasping at the colorful photographs. She was a happy, confident child who had never known a world where her worth was questioned or her reality was manipulated. That gift of certainty, of growing up knowing she was loved unconditionally, felt like the greatest victory of all. Morning mail brought an unexpected envelope from a law firm in Seattle. Inside was a formal request from Marcus asking to terminate his parental rights entirely. The letter cited his inability to maintain a relationship with Maya given the geographical distance and his desire to start fresh with Jessica, who was now pregnant with their first child together. I called Victoria immediately, and her response was swift and clear. "Granted, this is the best possible outcome for Maya. No custody disputes, no attempts at manipulation through visitation, no confusion about who her primary parent is." The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had spent 3 years lying about my fertility to justify leaving me, only to voluntarily abandon the child who proved his lies. He was choosing to walk away from the very thing he claimed to want most, demonstrating that his desire for children had always been about image and control rather than genuine love. That afternoon, Maya and I walked through Washington Square Park, where she delighted in chasing pigeons and climbing on the playground equipment. Other parents smiled at her infectious joy, never guessing the complicated circumstances of her birth or the legal battles that had secured her peaceful childhood. As the sun set over the city, we returned home to the loft that had become our sanctuary. The walls were covered with photos of Maya's milestones, artwork from the restaurant, and certificates recognizing my business achievements. It was a life built on authenticity rather than performance, on truth rather than convenient fiction. Marcus had tried to destroy me with lies about my fertility, but those lies had ultimately led me to discover my own strength and create something better than anything we had shared. Maya would grow up knowing that truth always prevails over deception, that documentation matters more than manipulation, and that a mother's love can protect against any attempt to diminish or control. The woman who had once believed she was broken had built a thriving business, raised a beautiful daughter, and created a support network for other women discovering their own strength. The future stretched ahead full of possibilities that Marcus had never been capable of imagining, let alone providing. Sometimes the greatest gift your enemies offer is the opportunity to finally become fully yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.